Hello, welcome to Andy Tales. After watching the video, make sure there's no one else in the room. Don't forget to write your city and the time in the comments.
The Secret of Ward 13, my real horror story from Greystone Asylum. I woke up strapped to a rusted bed in Greystone Asylum, the stench of decay choking my lungs, and a whisper so close it felt like a knife against my ear hissed. "You die in Ward 13. My name's Ethan. I'm 28, and this is the story of how I survived a month in a place that wasn't a hospital, it was a gateway to hell, where the walls bled, the shadows screamed, and something ancient hunted me every night. It started in the fall of 2019. I'd been unraveling after a car accident that killed my best friend, Mark. I was driving that night, and I couldn't shake the guilt. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his eyes bleeding black, his mouth stretched into a scream that sounded like 1,000 voices at once. I wake up clawing at my own skin, my screams echoing in my tiny apartment in New Jersey. My therapist said I was on the brink of a psychotic break, probably exacerbated by sleep deprivation and trauma. She recommended a month-long stay at Greystone Asylum for intensive treatment. I should have known something was wrong when I saw the place. A Gothic monstrosity, its stone walls cracked and stained, windows barred with iron, and ivy crawling up the fog like skeletal hands. The rusted gate groaned as it opened, a sound that reminded me of a dying animal. Crows circled overhead, their cries sounding like laughter, and the air carried a chill that seeped into my bones. They led me through the main hall, where the ceiling was so high the shadows seemed to swallow the light. Portraits of still-looking doctors from the 1800s lined the walls, their painted eyes following me as I walked. The air was thick with the smell of bleach, mold, and something metallic like blood that had soaked into the floors over decades. They put me in Ward 13, a wing that felt colder than the rest of the building, as if the warmth of life had been sucked out of it. The hallway leading to my room was lined with doors, some boarded up, others marked with faded red X's. I heard a faint moan from behind one of them, but the orderly escorting me, hulking man with a scar across his cheek, didn't even flinch. "Don't mind the noise," he grunted. "Some patients never leave." My room in Ward 13 was a nightmare of its own. The walls were a sickly yellow, stained with brown streaks that looked like dried blood, and scratched with frantic claw marks so deep they'd splintered the plaster. The bed was a metal frame, the mattress thin and covered in dark, crusty stains that smelled faintly of urine and rot. The single light bulb overhead buzzed and flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own, stretching and twisting into shapes that weren't human. Above my bed, carved into the plaster with something sharp, were the words, "She waits for you." I tried to laugh it off, but my voice echoed in the empty room, and I swear something laughed back, a low, guttural sound that made my blood run cold. The window was barred, the glass so grimy I could barely see the moon outside, but I noticed frost forming on the inside. Despite it being early fall, that first night, I couldn't sleep. The silence was suffocating, broken only by a faint scratching sound from the walls, like nails dragging across stone. I thought it was rats, but then I heard a sober child's sob coming from under my bed. My heart pounded so hard I thought it'd burst. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I forced myself to lean over the edge, my breath shaky, and peered into the darkness. There was nothing, except a small, rusted hairpan, crusted with dried blood, lying on the floor like it had been waiting for me. I grabbed it, my hands trembling, and threw it across the room. It hit the wall with a soft clink, and that's when the lights went out. In the pitch black, I saw her, a shadow on the wall, a woman with unnaturally long arms, her fingers ending in claws that scraped the plaster. Her head twitched unnaturally, like a marionette with broken strings, and she whispered my name, "Ethan." Her voice was a rasp, like she'd been screaming for centuries. I screamed, and the lights snapped back on. The shadow was gone, but the hairpan was back right on my pillow, its blood-crusted tip pointed at my face. The next morning, I was a mess. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. I begged the nurse, a gaunt woman named Margaret, to move me to another ward. She was tall, her face pale and hollow, her lips a thin line of disapproval. Her nurse's uniform was stained at the hem, and her hands were covered in tiny scars, like she'd been scratched by something or someone. Her eyes were empty, like she'd seen things she couldn't unsee, and when I told her about the shadow, she grabbed my arm so hard her nails drew blood. "Ward 13 doesn't let go of its patients," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "And don't speak of her, she'll hear you." I yanked my arm away, a chill running down my spine. Who was she? What did Margaret know that she wasn't telling me? On the second day, I met some of the other patients in the common room, a sterile, grey space with cracked tiles and a single flickering fluorescent light. There was a woman named Sarah, who rocked back and forth in the corner, muttering to herself about the red eyes in the walls. She wouldn't look at me, but I noticed her fingernails were bloody, like she'd been clawing at something. Another patient, an older man named Harold, Saturday by the window, staring blankly outside. He turned to me suddenly, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You're in 13, aren't you? You weren't last week." She always gets the ones in 13. Before I could ask what he meant, an orderly dragged him away, but not before I saw the terror in his eyes. That night, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "Ethan, you're mine." The voice was feminine, raspy, like it was coming from a throat that hadn't spoken in decades. I sat her day up, my breath visible in the freezing air, the frost on the walls, now forming patterns, spirals, and symbols that made my head ache to look at. I glanced at the cracked mirror across the room, and my blood turned to ice. It wasn't my reflection. It was hers, a woman in a tattered nurse's uniform, her skin grey and peeling, her eyes glowing red, her mouth stretched into a grotesque smile that showed rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. She raised a rusted scalpel, dripping with black ouncy, and the mirror shadowed on its own, glass flying everywhere. I shielded my face, but when I looked down, the shards on the floor reflected down scenes of our faces, all staring at me, all whispering my name in unison. "Ethan, Ethan." The sound was deafening, a chorus of voices that caught up my mind. By the third day, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept in 48 hours, and the voices wouldn't stop. They were in my head now, whispering things I couldn't understand, words in a language that sounded ancient and wrong. My skin felt raw, like something was crawling beneath it, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw her red eyes staring back at me. I met another patient, Tommy, in the common room. He was a wiry guy, maybe 30, with scars on his arms and eyes that darted like he was always watching for something. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, and he spoke in a low, hurried whisper. "You've seen her, haven't you? The matron." I nodded, my throat dry. He told me about Clara, a nurse who ran Ward 13 in the 1940s. She'd been obsessed with cleansing patients, believing they were possessed by demons. She'd torture them with electroshock, ice baths, and was cutting symbols into their skin to exorcise the evil. One night, she went too far. She killed 3 patients, carving their bodies with occult symbols, before hanging herself in the basement. Tommy's voice dropped even lower. "She's still here, man. She picks 1 patient every year, and you're in her ward. She marked you the moment you stepped in." I didn't want to believe him, but the evidence was piling up. That night, the 4th night, everything escalated. The whispers turned into screams, high-pitched, agonizing screams that made my ears bleed. The temperature in my room dropped to freezing, frost creeping up the walls like spiderwebs, forming faces that screamed silently. I heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming down the hall. The door creaked open on its own, and there she was, Clara, the matron. Her decayed face was illuminated by the flickering light, her red eyes burning into me like hot coals. Her nurse's uniform hung in tatters, stained with blood and black ouncy that dripped onto the floor, hissing as it burned through the tiles. She held a rusted scalpel, and her voice echoed in my skull. "You can run from me." I threw my blanket at her and pulled it for the door, but the hallway stretched endlessly, the walls pulsating like a living thing, announcing black slime that smelled like death. Faces formed in there, slimy, distorted, screaming faces of children, their eyes hollow, their mouths stretched in agony. I ran until I found a stairwell leading to the basement, thinking I could escape. The air down there was thick with a stench of rot, and the walls were stained with what looked like blood handprints, smeared and faded, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. I heard a faint humming, like a chant, coming from deeper in the basement. I followed the sound, my heart pounding, and found a locked room with a sign that read electroshock therapy. The door was ajar, and inside, I'll never forget what I saw. A metal chair Saturday in the center, surrounded by flickering black candles that seemed to breathe, their flames pulsing like a heartbeat. On the floor were down scenes of bonesmo, child-sized bone steeped with rotting cloth. Some had carvings on them, symbols that made my eyes burn to look at, and there was a rusted tray with surgical tools, crusted with dried blood. A letter journal lay open on the tray, its pages filled with frantic handwriting. It must be cleansed, the voices demanded. The children must be sacrificed. The air was heavy, pressing down on me like a physical weight, and I heard a child's laughter gold, "Hello," echoing from the walls. I turned to leave, but the candles flared brighter, and the shadows on the walls came alive, forming clawed hands that reached for me. Clara's voice filled the room. "You'll join them." I spun around, and she was right behind me, her scalpel inches from my throat. Her face was inches from mine, her breath reeking of decay, and I saw something move in her icy hands, calling to get out, their fingers black and dripping with owancy. Her smile widened, her jaw unhinging to reveal a gaping maw filled with writhing, eel-like tongues. I was paralyzed. But then first twist Tommy burst in. He'd followed me, his face pale but determined. "She can take us both," he shouted, grabbing a metal pipe from the floor and swinging it at her. The pipe passed through her like she was made of smoke, but it distracted her long enough for me to act. I grabbed a fire extinguisher off the wall and smashed the lock on the door. We ran, her screams echoing behind us, the candles flaring up like they were alive, the shadows on the walls lunging after us. We made it to the main gate, but the guards didn't stop you as they just watched, their faces blanked, their eyes reflecting the same red glow I'd seen in Clara's. I thought I was free. I thought I'd escaped, but the nightmare didn't end. On the 7th night, back in my apartment, I heard the whispers again. I tried to ignore them, but they grew louder, more insistent. "Ethan, you're mine." I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face, and that's when I saw its second twist. My reflection wasn't mine. It was Clara's decayed face, her red eyes glowing, her smile stretching wider and wider until her jaw unhinged, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. She reached through the mirror, her claw-like hand wrapping around my throat, and I felt my skin burn where she touched me, the pain searing like acid. I smashed the mirror, but the shards kept reflecting her face, her laughter echoing in my ears, a sound that made my teeth ache. The next day, I thought I was losing my mind. I started seeing her everywhere, in the reflections of windows, in the shadows on the street, even in the steam on my bathroom mirror after a shower. Every night, the whispers grew louder, and I started waking up with scratches on my arms, deep and jagged, like they'd been carved with a scalpel. I went to a priest, thinking he could help, but when I told him about Clara, his face went pale. He said he'd heard of Greystone and rumors that it was built on a site where witches were executed in the 1600s, and that the hospital had been a front for occult experiments in the early 1900s. He gave me a cross and told me to pray, but that night, the cross melted in my hand, the metal burning my skin, leaving a scar in the shape of one of the symbols I'd seen in the basement. On the 10th day, I found something that made my blood run cold. The twist. I was cleaning my apartment, trying to distract myself, when I found a rusted key under my couch. It was engraved with the words Ward 13. I hadn't brought anything from Greystone, so how did it get here? That night, I heard a knock at my door, but when I opened it, no one was there. Instead, there was a trail of black ouncy leading down the hallway, and at the end of it, a hairpin I'd found that first night, its blood-crusted tip now wet, as if it had just been used. I slammed the door, my hands shaking, and that's when the lights in my apartment started flickering. Clara's voice filled the room. "You can't escape what you've awakened." I moved to another state, changed my name, burned the hairpin and the key, but it didn't matter. On the 15th day, I woke up in the middle of the night to find my bedroom walls covered in the same symbols I'd seen in the basement, carved so deep they bled black ouncy. My mirror was intact again, but my reflection was gone, replaced by Clara, her red eyes glowing brighter than ever. She stepped out of the mirror this time, her decayed body dripping with ouncy, her scalpel raised. I ran, but every door I opened led back to my room, her laughter growing louder, the air growing colder. I collapsed, my vision fading, and the last thing I heard was her voice. "You'll always be mine." Here's the final twist. I woke up the next morning, but I wasn't in my apartment. I was back in Ward 13, strapped to the same rusted bed, the same stench of decay filling my lungs. The walls were covered in fresh scratches, and above my bed was a new carving. "You never left." I don't know if I ever escaped Greystone, or if I'm still there, trapped in a loop that never ends. I still hear her whispers, feel her scalpel against my skin, and every time I look in a mirror, I see her standing behind me, her red eyes burning into my soul. If you ever get sent to Greystone, don't go to Ward 13.